It's exactly 4 years since Ukraine's President Yanukovych was overthrown as the result of a popular uprising that began in Kiev in November 2013. Now, the protests, which were initially peaceful, began in response to endemic corruption and the government's decision to abandon an economic deal with the European Union. But it quickly spiraled out of control. Years on from the uprising, some of the Maidan activists now see the protests in a very different light. They say their hopes for meaningful change in the country have not materialized. We've been speaking to one of them about her change of heart.
The students, compassion for them and sharing their anti-corruption and socially oriented ideas, which were sincere but were hijacked by the oligarchs almost at the very start. I believe it was a mistake to fall for the slogans of the nationalists. My personal mistake is that I should have realized that much sooner. The people who started those spontaneous protests could answer the question of what they were against, but couldn't say what they stood for. That was the key problem. They didn't have a plan and therefore allowed themselves to be used. But I have no right to judge people for taking part in the protests. It's thought that people at Maidan were supporting so-called European values. But can a country be called European if it sits at the bottom of a list on freedom of speech? If it's a country where journalists get killed, arrested or persecuted? Why did the revolution for freedom not result in freedom? And if Europe stands for multiculturalism, why did the European revolution in Ukraine result in the victory of nationalist radicals? The romanticism became a smokescreen for extremist slogans, which had nothing to do with the initial protests.
During the uprising, the protesters in Kiev received strong support from both US and EU officials. Top American politicians were seen addressing crowds of people at the demonstrations and even distributing bread. European officials also involved themselves in negotiations between the two opposing sides. But now the bloc appears to have become disillusioned with the country's ability to deliver reforms. And the latest illustration of that, the EU's reportedly decided to shut down a border checkpoint scheme with Ukraine, which was supposed to ease customs proceedings and boost trade. We discussed that with political analyst Martin McCauley.
Ukraine, from Brussels' point of view, from the American point of view, is an important state. These countries wish to keep Ukraine as a partner and as a friend and as an ally, but they're finding it increasingly difficult. The European Union and Western Europe are becoming increasingly tired of Ukraine and exasperated at the lack of progress on in certain areas. The main problem is corruption. Within the government, within the state, the Ukrainian elites are in fact siphoning off some of the money for themselves or awarding contracts among themselves and so on. The European Union has been hoping that Ukraine would begin to limit corruption within the state for years, for 2 decades now. So therefore, very slow progress has been achieved. And unless it's achieved, the Ukraine and the European Union and the Western world will not come closer together.